Hey folks, today we are going to look at these Yarnology crochet hooks. Now these were $1.99 at Hobby Lobby, and I believe that Yarnology is their house brand. But these were really interesting to me, not only for the price, but also for the sizes, size G, H, and I, which is 4.25 to 5.5 millimeters. And when I was looking at these, I noticed that the shape of the head was really interesting to me. They are tapered aluminum hooks, but they reminded me of some of my vintage hooks. Y'all who know this channel know that I'm a big fan of your standard vintage crochet hook, the straight aluminum ones, and I really love the shape of those. And so I wanted to see how these Yarnology ones stack up. Now, just as a point of comparison, I am in Nashville, Tennessee, and these were purchased just at that price in late March of 2025. When I am usually able to find my vintage hooks, I can find them at a local thrift store that specializes in arts and crafts supplies, and I can get these for $1 a piece. So even as like a used or vintage price, this is much better. And to my memory, even today, the modern Boye hooks or even Susan Bates or whatever standard aluminum hooks that you get usually cost at least $1, if not more, whether you're going to Walmart or online or things like that. So I wanted to look at these not only for the shape, but also for the price and see how they compare and see if they might be, just in terms of their shape, a good compromise or a good alternative to those of us who really have an affinity for those vintage hooks. All right, first thing that I want to notice about these hooks is that they do not have a brand on the back of the thumb grip, but on the front of them, they have both the millimeters and the American sizes. So we have a G, H, and an I, so 4.25 millimeter, 5.5 millimeter, and a 5.5 millimeter. Let's start by looking at the 4.25 millimeter. So to compare, I have a brand Prym hook. This is a 4.5 millimeter, but just to give a slight difference in terms of looking at the head shape and how it looks. I do have a more modern Boye hook, which is 4.25 millimeter. You know that it's modern because it has the straight script. It's not a flowy cursive script, and it doesn't say USA on it. And so we have that kind of hook shape. Then I have a vintage Boye, which is in cursive there, and it is marked USA, but it doesn't have the millimeterage on it. So let's see how this one, this new one from Hobby Lobby, the Yarnology, let's see how that compares in terms of the shape of the head of the hook. And what I'm seeing so far, I'm actually really excited about, because I see that there's pretty distinct difference between the Yarnology and the modern Boye. This Yarnology has a much more defined point up there. It has an indentation there in the throat. And whereas the modern Boye is kind of on the same plane all throughout, it doesn't have that indentation up in there. In terms of how they stack up, it looks like the Yarnology might have a little bit of length going for it, and it also has a thumb grip that's a little bit higher up. But let's compare that to the vintage Boye. And these two are looking really similar, which makes me happy, because that is my theory, that these Yarnology ones might be a good compromise for those of us that are having trouble, that really have an affinity for these vintage hooks and aren't able to find them. So you can see that this indentation, or this how this narrows down, it's a little bit of a longer narrowing, like it takes longer for it to narrow down on the vintage hook. But on this newer one, it's not bad. But again, I'm loving what I'm seeing in terms of this little indentation. You see that they're both a bit more pointed. This one is a bit maybe blunter right here on the kind of the knob of it. The terminology with hooks is challenging, but yeah, just look around, see from the back. See how this vintage one is ever so slightly more narrow, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think this Yarnology hook might be a good in-between from the Prym and the vintage hook, the vintage Boye. So the Prym is significantly shorter, slightly different there in terms of where the thumb grip is placed, but look at the shape of that hook head right there. So in the Prym, you have a very distinct kind of throat, that plane up in there. Really nice for grabbing, but from the back, it looks like how it tapers down is much more similar to the Prym. And you can see that this Yarnology is ever so slightly more bulbous, the way that the Prym is. Not quite as pronounced as the Prym, but ever so slightly. So yeah, I'm excited. That is looking good for the size G hook. It's wonderful because I was actually looking for a spare of this vintage Boye, and so I'm really hopeful that this will fit the bill there. Let's move on to the size H, the 5.0 millimeter. I think we're gonna find it pretty similar. If you look at all four of these hooks kind of laid out, you see that the Prym is ever so slightly shorter, and then you can kind of see how the thumb grips line up. In terms of comparing the Yarnology to the more modern Boye hook, you see a very distinct difference in how the hook head is shaped. You see a difference in kind of where that hook head ends. Here you come in really sharply and have to, for lack of a better word, have to hook it in, but it's a little bit more open in the throat for the Yarnology one. You also see similarly how this is a bit wider and a bit more pointed at the top. It's wider, it creates more of a triangle versus this creates more of an oval shape. And you can also see, comparing to the modern Boye, how the taper is a bit more gradual on the Yarnology. Moving on to look at the Prym hook. Very similar in terms of how bulbous that head is. The Prym is ever so slightly wider, but similar in other ways. Again, the Prym is very defined in its planes. And I'm not sure if the color brown is the easiest to see on camera. I'm trying to get the light so you can really see how they stack up. But I do think if you are a fan of Prym hooks, I know that a lot of places carry the plastic Prym hooks that are a bit more ergonomic. I remember that I had to get these straight aluminum ones. I had to order them special from Amazon. But if you're a fan of the Prym shape, but you want a hook that is a little bit more accessible, a little bit better of a price point, maybe the Yarnology ones are something that you might want to go for. Again, that 5.0 millimeter is where it's at. But yeah, I think these two are fairly comparable. And again, I think that this Yarnology hook is pretty similar. It's kind of right in between the Prym and the vintage Boye. So we'll look at those two now together. So the vintage Boye is definitely a bit thinner and a bit more narrow. It has a bit of a longer taper on it, and I still really do love that. So you do see a bit more roundness on the Yarnology hook. But I do think they are looking fairly comparable. I think they're going to be a wonderful addition to my crochet repertoire. And I think just based on what I'm seeing so far, I think these could be a really, really wonderful tool to have. And honestly, having that color brown is pretty distinctive, so I don't think I will get that mixed up with the others. Last, we are going to look at the size I, the 5.5 millimeter hook. This is one of my favorite sizes to work with, and you can see again from that hook head that it kind of cuts in there. I'm hoping that you can see the reflection, and that reveals a bit of the shape of it. Here we are going to compare this Yarnology hook to, first of all, a Hero hook. Now, I don't have many Hero hooks in my collection. This is one of them. I think it's a wonderful design and it's a beautifully performing hook, but when you look at the hook and the Hero, it is a little bit more in line, but then it tapers in, and then the way that it cuts up into the throat is very sharp and severe. A bit more severe, I would say, even than the Prym. So would Yarnology be a good substitute for Hero? I think they're similar enough, but I do think that the Hero is very pointed, and comparatively, the Yarnology is a bit more rounded off, but I don't think it will be as rounded off as the modern Boye hooks. In terms of how severe that taper is, they're pretty comparable though. And in terms of their size and the placement of that thumb grip, I also think they're fairly comparable. Here is my modern eye hook from the Boye company. Again, you can kind of see how there isn't really a cut up into that throat, and it is quite round at the top there. So it's all kind of on the same plane here. It reminds me of like a teardrop or a raindrop. And then once you get into it, the hook itself is not blunted off at all there at that tip. But yes, here are the two, the modern Boye hook and the Yarnology hook. Fairly comparable in other ways, but if you really like the hook control, the yarn control that you get by having a little bit of a taper up in that throat, then I think this is going to be a better fit for you. But finally, I'm going to compare this to one of my absolute favorite hooks, which is this vintage made in the USA size eye hook. And it's in that nice matte finish. So yeah, these all, the Yarnology brand are all the shiny finish, not the matte finish. Not a big difference, but it can affect things. So here you see that there is a bit of a wider gap in between that hook tip and the throat of it. Not extreme, and of course all of these are very small differences. They're so minute. So why do we even bother looking at them? Well, because sometimes in an art form that requires so much fine motor control, sometimes small differences can make a big difference in how we experience our tools. And because we're nerds, we love this craft. So you might be curious about these, and I just wanted to show you guys a closer look. Again, coming around to the back, you see that on the vintage Boye hook, it does narrow down significantly more than the Yarnology. But in terms of how close the Yarnology is to the vintage Boye, I would say that Yarnology is much closer to the vintage Boye than it is to the modern Boye, and I would say that Yarnology is much closer to the vintage Boye than the modern Boye is to the vintage Boye. So I am actually not going to take my time crocheting with these for this video. I'm confident in the hooks that I use. I feel like I can confidently say that these will perform fine. There's not a whole lot of variation in terms of actual performance. It really is, what does it feel like in the hand? But yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this little exploration. I think for me, moving forward in the future, because the price point was so wonderful, if I were to start some crocheters out, I would hit up the Yarnology brand. They had these sets of 3 for $2. They had another set that was, I believe, sizes J, K, and L, which is 6.0, 6.5, and 7mm hooks. And you could also get a whole variety of hooks of many more sizes, all in one kit. So if that is something that you are looking for, you're looking to try out some new hooks without a huge price point on them, I would definitely check out the Yarnology brand. This video is not sponsored. There are no affiliated links, but it's just for your curiosity. So thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Thank you for letting me ramble on about the minutia of something as small and significant to me as a aluminum crochet hook. And if for whatever reason I'm not your cup of tea, thank you so much for listening this long. I do appreciate you, and I do hope I'll see you again soon. Bye.